Joining us now is Democratic Senator Chris Coons. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Allison. That's really a striking assertion on the part of President Trump that the Republican Party is now going to be the party of health care. I'd say with his leadership, it'll be the party of taking health care away.
Well, let's talk about this because we just had former GOP Senator Rick Santorum on, who is pretty bullish about the Republicans seizing an opportunity here. He cited what he calls the Health Care Choices Act. And basically, I think it would give states block grants or a lump sum of money. I mean, I may be butchering this, but from what I understood from what he just said, from the federal government, put control back in the states. He thinks that it will have lower premiums and cover more people than currently Obamacare does.
Well, that's great that former Senator Santorum thinks that. I'll tell you, the most important thing about the Affordable Care Act for more than 150 million Americans who get their health care through their employer is that it protects you against discrimination by an insurance company if you have a pre-existing condition. In my little state of Delaware, we have 900,000 people. 400,000 of us have a pre-existing condition. And one of the worst parts about how health insurance worked before Obamacare was that you'd get health insurance through your employer and think it was strong and reliable right up until you needed it. And then insurance companies were very adept at finding ways to deny coverage, in particular if you had a pre-existing condition. I don't think Americans want to go back to the day of trapdoor health care policies like that. I think the Affordable Care Act, that protection in particular, is widely popular. And the Republicans will find that since they don't really have a replacement bill that does what the Affordable Care Act does, stripping away that key protection through legal action by the Trump administration will prove wildly unpopular.
I think you've captured the problem and what people really wrestled with before the Affordable Care Act very well. However, as you know, premiums have gone up, costs have gone up. The Affordable Care Act is not perfect. And so is there a window of opportunity for the Republicans here to make it better than what currently exists?
There is. I've proposed several bills to try and improve on the Affordable Care Act, in particular to make access to health insurance more affordable for small businesses. Unfortunately, it's been really difficult to find bipartisan co-sponsors. Senator Toomey of Pennsylvania and I actually did introduce and get passed, I think, the only statutory revision to the Affordable Care Act. We worked with a dozen other members, House and Senate, but it was a very small piece of improving the Affordable Care Act. He's also a good partner with me in legislating on background checks for guns, something we just introduced yesterday. But on health care, it's been difficult to find bipartisan partners really willing to strengthen the foundation of the Affordable Care Act, rather than what the Trump administration is trying to do, which is to strip it away and replace it with something that would literally just hand block grants to states.
And I do want to get to your gun policy. It's really important, particularly on this anniversary week of the march. And I did have a chance to talk to the Parkland students yesterday, so we'll get to that in one moment. But first, I just want to talk quickly Democratic strategy, because, you know, there's this debate about whether or not to continue talking about collusion and conspiracy and whatever wrongdoing, if there was any, was done by President Trump's campaign, or move on to health care. And so Adam Schiff, as you know, the chair, of course, of the Intelligence Committee, said to the Washington Post yesterday he's sticking with his collusion fight. He says, undoubtedly, there is collusion. We will continue to investigate the counterintelligence issues. That is the president or people around him, are they compromised in any way by a hostile foreign power? It doesn't appear that was any part of Mueller's report. Are you comfortable with Chairman Schiff digging in that way?
Well, I think we're capable of addressing two different issues at the same time. And if the Intelligence Committee in the House wants to continue the counterintelligence aspect of this issue, I think that's fine. It's undisputable now, particularly given Mueller's report on this topic, that the Russians interfered in our 2016 election. I think likely, from what we're hearing from the intelligence community, they will try to do so again in 2020. So I do think Congress has a role, in particular looking forward, making sure that our next election is not at risk of being interfered with or interrupted by any hostile powers. But what I hear from folks up and down Delaware, Allison, is that they're concerned about health care. They're concerned about health care, about better jobs, about the opioid crisis, and they want to see us find ways to work together to deal with those issues.
So, Senator, I'm here in D.C. on assignment because I came down yesterday to talk to some of the Parkland students. You know, they put up this big art installation just outside of the Capitol because they wanted to get all of your attention. They wanted lawmakers to have to look out the window and see all of this very dramatic bullseye that they put out there with a student sitting right in the middle, trapped at their desk, of the bullseye to prove that students are still sitting ducks, they feel, at their schools because of all these school shootings. And I know that you, as you point out, are engaged in attempting to pass bipartisan legislation. So what would that change?
Well, there is a practice now where if you go into a federally licensed gun store and apply to purchase a firearm, you have to pass a background check. That means you fill out a piece of paper and you have to check a box that says, I've not been convicted of a felony such that I'm prohibited from owning a gun. In about 12 states, the state law enforcement agency runs that background check. So if you actually are not allowed to have a gun and you lie and try to buy a gun, they know immediately. And in the state of Pennsylvania, represented by Senator Toomey, that has meant hundreds of people have been arrested by state law enforcement for violating the limitations on their gun ownership rights that comes from being a convicted felon. In Delaware and about 30 other states, that's not the case. The gun store runs that background check directly with federal law enforcement, and state and local law enforcement are not notified. It is a tremendous predictor that you are trying to get a gun, probably to do something bad, if you are a person who is either previously adjudicated mentally ill or previously convicted of a felony. So law enforcement leaders with whom I've spoken in Delaware are eager to have this tool, prompt notification from federal law enforcement when a person prohibited tries to get a gun. We had a good bipartisan hearing on the Judiciary Committee yesterday, Allison, about gun violence notification laws, exactly the kind of law that if it were on the books in Florida might well have prevented the Parkland shooting, and what we can federally do to encourage and support those laws. I also raised this NICS denial notification bill that Senator Toomey, Senator Rubio, Senator Jones, and I introduced yesterday, and I think it's an important tool in the toolkit for law enforcement.
Well, I know the Parkland students will appreciate any sort of progress at the federal level. Thanks for explaining all of that to us. Senator Chris Coons, thanks for being on New Day.
Thank you, Allison.